The bitter January wind of 1878 carried whispers through Oklahoma City that would change two lives forever. Though neither Willa Greene nor Frank Ferguson knew it yet, as the stagecoach rumbled into town with a cargo of judgment wrapped in black mourning clothes. Willa pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window, watching the dusty streets materialize through the Oklahoma Territory haze. 6 months had passed since Daniel's death. 6 months since the mine collapse that took her husband and her reputation in one cruel blow. The letter she clutched in her other hand promised work at the Riverside Hotel, but the tremor in her fingers had nothing to do with the cold. She had learned that promises meant little when people discovered the truth about her past. The stagecoach jerked to a stop outside the depot, and Willa gathered her small carpet bag, the sum total of everything she still owned. The driver opened the door, but his eyes would not meet hers. She had grown accustomed to that look, or rather, the lack of one. People in Silver Creek had stopped looking at her directly after the funeral, after they learned Daniel had left her nothing but debts, and the revelation that she had been working in the saloon before their marriage. A widow who had once poured drinks for minors was somehow more scandalous than the married men who drank there nightly. Her boots touched the frozen ground, and she nearly slipped on a patch of ice. A strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her before she could fall. Willa looked up into eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold, set in a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun. "Careful there," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. "These streets get treacherous this time of year." "Thank you," Willa managed, pulling her arm back quickly. She had learned to keep distance between herself and kindness. It always evaporated once people knew. The man tipped his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He was tall, broad-shouldered in his heavy coat, with the look of someone who worked the land. Something in his gaze lingered on her face for a moment longer than necessary, but without the calculating coldness she had come to expect. Then he stepped back, allowing her to pass. Willa hurried toward the hotel, her heart hammering. The Riverside was a 3-story building with fresh paint and lace curtains in the windows, far nicer than the rough establishments she had known in Silver Creek. She pushed through the door into warmth and the smell of beeswax and coffee. A woman stood behind the desk, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. She looked up as Willa entered, and something flickered across her face. "Mrs. Greene?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes, I received a letter about a position here, housekeeping and kitchen work." Willa kept her voice steady, professional. The woman's lips thinned further. "I am afraid there has been a mistake. The position has been filled." The words landed like stones. Willa's chest tightened. "But the letter was dated only 2 weeks ago. I traveled 3 days to get here." "Circumstances change," the woman said, turning her attention to papers on the desk. "Good day, Mrs. Greene, please." Willa hated the desperation in her voice, but the coins in her purse would not stretch to another stagecoach fare, would barely cover a week's room and board. "I am a hard worker. I can do laundry, cooking, cleaning. I do not require much in wages." The woman looked up, and now there was something almost pitying in her expression. "Mrs. Greene, I received a letter from Silver Creek, from a Mrs. Dorothy Hammond. She felt it her Christian duty to inform me of your history. We run a respectable establishment here. I cannot have a woman of your background around our guests." Heat flooded Willa's face, but she would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had learned to hold tears back, to let them come only in darkness where no one could see. "I understand," she said quietly, and turned toward the door. The cold hit her like a slap. Willa stood on the boardwalk, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She had enough money for perhaps 3 nights in a boarding house, if she could find one that would take her. Then what? The question echoed in her mind with the howl of the wind. Her feet carried her down the street, past shops closing for the evening, past families heading home for supper. She felt untethered, drifting, a piece of tumbleweed blown by forces beyond her control. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, she found a small church with a bench outside. She sank onto it, finally allowing the weight of her situation to settle fully on her shoulders. "You look like you could use a hot meal." Willa started, looking up to find the man from the stagecoach depot standing a few feet away. He held a package wrapped in brown paper. "I am fine, thank you," she said automatically. He did not move. "No offense, madam, but you do not look fine. You look cold and tired and like the world just kicked you when you were already down." He held out the package. "My housekeeper made extra bread today, still warm. I cannot eat it all myself." Willa stared at the package, her stomach cramping with hunger she had been ignoring. Pride warred with need and need won. She reached out slowly, taking the bread. "Thank you," she whispered. The man sat on the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "I am Frank Ferguson. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town, cattle mostly, some horses." "Willa Greene." She unwrapped the bread, breaking off a piece. It was still warm, soft, and tender, and she had to close her eyes at the simple pleasure of it. "You just arrived on the stage," Frank said. It was not a question. "Yes, I came for a job that apparently no longer exists." Willa heard the bitterness in her voice and tried to soften it. "I will find something else." Frank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Jobs are scarce in winter. Most ranchers do not hire until spring, and the businesses in town have all the help they need." "Then I will wait until spring." She did not know how, but she would find a way. She always had. "Or you could come work for me." Willa's hand froze with the bread halfway to her mouth. She turned to look at him, searching for the trap, the price that would come with such an offer. Frank's face was open, honest, and she wanted to trust it so badly it hurt. "I do not understand," she said slowly. "My housekeeper, Martha, she is getting on in years. Her arthritis is bad, especially in winter. She needs help with the cooking and cleaning, the washing. The work is hard, but the pay is fair, and there is a small cabin on the property where you would stay. Private, separate from the main house." He met her eyes directly. "Whatever you are running from, whatever people say about you, it does not matter to me. I judge people by their work and their character, not by gossip." Tears burned at the back of Willa's throat. "You know nothing about me. I could be a thief or worse. Are you?" "No." "Then that is enough for me." Frank stood, adjusting his hat. "The offer stands until tomorrow morning. I come into town every week for supplies. I will be at the general store at 8 if you decide to accept. If not, no hard feelings." He walked away before she could respond, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. Willa watched him go, the bread warm in her hands, hope a fragile thing unfurling in her chest. She found a boarding house that would rent her a room by the night, a narrow space with a single bed and a washstand. But it was clean and the door had a lock. She lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, weighing her options. Frank Ferguson seemed genuine, but she had believed in kindness before and been proven wrong. Daniel had seemed kind too at first, before the drinking started, before the debts piled up, before she learned that his promises were as empty as his pockets. But what choice did she have? She could try to find work in another town, but that required money for travel, and her funds were nearly gone. She could try to survive in Oklahoma City, but winter was the cruelest time to be without shelter or steady income. Or she could take a chance on a stranger with creek-colored eyes who offered help without asking for anything in return. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Willa had made her decision. She dressed carefully in her cleanest dress, the black mourning clothes she had worn for 6 months. It was expected that a widow wear black for a full year, and she had 5 months remaining. Part of her longed to shed the somber fabric, to wear colors again, but respectability demanded its price. The general store was already open when she arrived at 10 minutes before 8. She stood outside, clutching her carpetbag, second-guessing everything. Then Frank appeared, leading a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He saw her and something in his expression lightened, though he did not quite smile. "Morning, Mrs. Greene," he said, climbing down from the wagon seat. "Morning, Mr. Ferguson." Willa took a breath. "About your offer, if it still stands, I would like to accept." Now he did smile, just a slight curve of his mouth. "It stands. Let me finish getting supplies, then we can head out to the ranch." Willa helped him load sacks of flour and sugar, coffee and dried beans, all the necessities for a working ranch. Other people came and went from the store, and she noticed the looks they gave her, the whispers. Word traveled fast, even in a town as large as Oklahoma City. She kept her head down, focusing on the work. When everything was loaded, Frank helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. The horses started forward at his command, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open prairie dusted with snow, endless sky stretching in all directions. "It is beautiful," Willa said softly, watching the land roll past. "It is hard land," Frank replied. "Drought in summer, freezes in winter, always something trying to kill your cattle or destroy your crops. But yes, it is beautiful. When I first came here after the war, I thought I would stay a year, maybe 2. That was 10 years ago. You fought in the war." Willa asked, then immediately regretted it. Many men did not like to talk about those years, but Frank just nodded. "Union Army, though that does not mean much out here anymore. Most people just want to forget and move forward." He glanced at her. "What about you? Where are you from originally?" "Ohio, small farming town. I came west with my father when I was 18. He had dreams of striking gold." Willa's hands tightened on her carpetbag. "He died of pneumonia the first winter. After that, I had to find work however I could." "That is when you met your husband, 2 years later." "Daniel was a miner, seemed steady. We married quickly." Too quickly, she realized now, but loneliness made people do desperate things. "He died 6 months ago, cave-in at the mine." "I am sorry," Frank said, and she could tell he meant it. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The land stretched endlessly, broken by occasional stands of cottonwood trees and the frozen ribbons of creeks. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. The cold bit at Willa's cheeks, but the sun was bright, and she felt something inside her begin to thaw just slightly. The ranch appeared gradually, first as distant buildings on the horizon, then resolving into a main house of weathered wood with a stone chimney, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a small cabin set apart from the rest. Cattle dotted the landscape, shaggy winter coats making them look larger than they were. Horses moved in a fenced pasture, their manes whipping in the wind. Frank pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. Before they could climb down, the door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair and a face lined by years of honest work. She wore an apron over her dress and walked with a slight limp. "Martha," Frank called, "this is Mrs. Greene. She is going to be helping you with the housework." Martha looked Willa up and down, her expression neutral. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam." "Can you handle laundry, heavy lifting?" "Yes, madam." Can you milk a cow? I can learn. Something in Martha's face softened. Good answer. Too many girls these days think they are above learning. Come inside, let me show you around. The main house was larger than it looked from outside, with a big kitchen dominated by a cast iron stove, a dining area, a sitting room with a fireplace, and stairs leading to the second floor. Everything was clean but worn, practical rather than decorative. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something baking. Frank lives simply, Martha explained. He does not need fancy things, just good food and clean clothes. We do washing on Mondays, ironing on Tuesdays, baking twice a week. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse mostly, but Frank takes his meals here and sometimes the foreman joins him. She led Willa through to the back door, pointing out the well, the smokehouse, the root cellar. Then they walked across the yard to the small cabin. It was one room with a stone fireplace, a bed, a table and chair, and a small stove for cooking. Simple but solid, with glass windows and a sturdy door. It is not much, Martha said, but it is warm and dry. Frank built it for his mother when she was still alive. She passed 3 years back. It is perfect, Willa said honestly. After sleeping in boarding houses and the rough tent she and Daniel had shared in Silver Creek, this felt like luxury. Martha nodded. Good. Get yourself settled, then come to the main house. Might as well start learning the routine today. The older woman left, and Willa stood in the center of the cabin, setting down her carpet bag. She walked slowly around the space, touching the solid walls, the smooth wood of the table. Through the window, she could see the main house, the barn, the endless stretch of prairie beyond. For the first time in months, the tightness in her chest eased slightly. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. She unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses, one for everyday wear and one slightly nicer for church, undergarments, a nightgown, a small photograph of her parents in a tarnished frame, and a book of poetry Daniel had given her during their courtship, back when he still tried to be the man he pretended to be. She set the photograph on the table and slipped the book under her pillow, then changed into her work dress. The main house kitchen was warm from the stove. Martha stood at the counter, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency despite her gnarled hands. You can start by peeling those potatoes, she said, nodding toward a bucket. Frank likes a hearty stew for dinner, especially in winter. Willa washed her hands and picked up a knife, falling into the familiar rhythm of peeling. Martha worked beside her in silence for a while, then said, Frank is a good man, fair, honest. He will not cheat you on wages or try anything improper. Whatever you are running from, you are safe here. Thank you, Willa said softly, not trusting herself to say more. That said, he has had his share of heartbreak. His wife died 7 years ago, fever. They had only been married 3 years. Martha's hands never stopped moving. He buried himself in work after that, building this ranch into something solid. A lot of women in town would like to catch his eye, but he keeps to himself. I am telling you this so you understand. He is not the kind of man who plays games or takes advantage. Willa nodded, understanding the warning beneath the words. Martha was protecting Frank, making sure Willa knew the boundaries. I am not looking for anything beyond honest work, madam. I just need a place to start over. Fair enough. Martha smiled for the first time, and it transformed her stern face. Now, tell me what you know about making good bread. The days fell into a pattern. Willa rose before dawn, started the fire in her cabin's small stove, then walked through the cold to the main house. She and Martha worked together, cooking breakfast for Frank and whoever else was working close to the house, then cleaning, washing, mending. The work was hard but satisfying, and Martha proved to be a patient teacher. Frank was polite but distant, offering good morning and thank you but little else. Willa told herself this was better, safer. She focused on her tasks, learning the rhythms of the ranch. She met the ranch hands gradually. Old Ben, who managed the horses, young Tommy, who was learning the cattle business, and James the foreman, a serious man in his 40s who had worked with Frank since the beginning. 2 weeks passed. The frozen ground began to thaw slightly during the day, though it still froze hard at night. Willa fell into bed exhausted each evening, but it was a good exhaustion, earned through honest labor. Her hands grew rough from washing and work, but her purse grew heavier with her wages, and that felt like the greatest luxury of all. One morning, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, her breath forming clouds in the air, when she heard shouting from the barn. She looked up to see Tommy running toward the main house, his face pale. "Mrs. Greene, get Mr. Ferguson quick. Ben got kicked by one of the horses." Willa dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the house. Frank was in his office working on the ranch accounts. She burst through the door without knocking. "Ben is hurt. Horse kicked him." Frank was on his feet instantly, grabbing his coat. They ran together to the barn where Ben lay on the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face gray with pain. James was already there, having heard the commotion. "Easy, Ben," Frank said, kneeling beside the old man. "Let me see." Ben groaned as Frank gently examined the leg. "It is broken," Frank said grimly. "We need to get him to the doctor in town. James, help me get him into the wagon." "I will go with you," Willa said. "He will need someone to keep him steady on the rough roads." Frank looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." They made a stretcher from a blanket and carefully moved Ben to the wagon. Willa climbed into the back with him, cushioning his head on her lap, while Frank took the reins and drove as fast as he dared over the rutted roads. Ben drifted in and out of consciousness, and Willa talked to him softly, the way she used to talk to her father during his final illness, meaningless words meant only to provide comfort. The doctor's office was in the center of town. Frank carried Ben inside while Willa held the door, then waited in the outer room while the doctor worked. An hour passed, then 2. Frank paced like a caged animal while Willa sat, her hands folded in her lap, her dress stained with dirt from the barn. Finally, the doctor emerged. "The leg is set, but it was a bad break. He will need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. Can he stay at the ranch?" "Of course," Frank said. "Whatever he needs." "Good. He will need watching for the first few days in case of fever or other complications." They arranged for Ben to stay in one of the spare rooms in the main house, where Martha and Willa could keep an eye on him. Frank carried the old man in carefully, his face set with worry. Ben had worked for him since the beginning, was more friend than employee. That night, after Ben was settled and sleeping under the influence of the doctor's laudanum, Willa sat in the kitchen with Martha, preparing a light supper. Frank came in, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Thank you," he said to Willa, "for your help today." "You did not have to come with us." "Of course I did," Willa said simply. Ben needed someone. Frank sat at the table and Martha set coffee in front of him. He wrapped his hands around the cup, staring into it as though it held answers. "I should have replaced that horse months ago. She has always been temperamental, and Ben is getting too old to be handling difficult animals." "You cannot blame yourself for an accident," Martha said firmly. "These things happen on ranches." "She is right," Willa added. "I saw what happened. Ben slipped on some straw. Even the gentlest horse might have kicked out of surprise." Frank looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she had arrived. "You have worked on ranches before." "My father had a small farm in Ohio." "Not like this, but I learned about animals, about the way accidents can happen no matter how careful you are." She met his gaze steadily. "You cannot control everything, Mr. Ferguson. You can only do your best and deal with what comes. Something in his expression shifted, softened. Frank. Please call me Frank. Then you should call me Willa. Martha looked between them and smiled slightly, though she said nothing. Ben's recovery was slow. Willa split her time between the regular housework and tending to the old man, who proved to be a difficult patient, chafing at his enforced stillness. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, sat with him when the pain was bad, and talked about anything and everything to distract him. "You are a good woman," Ben said one afternoon, his weathered face sincere. "Frank is lucky to have you here." "I am the lucky one," Willa replied. "This place, all of you, you gave me a chance when no one else would. That is because Frank is not like other people. He does not judge by surface things. He looks deeper." Ben shifted carefully in the bed. "You know, he built this ranch with his own 2 hands. After the war, after he lost Emily, he could have given up. A lot of men did, but he pushed through. He is stubborn that way." Willa found herself thinking about Frank's hands as she worked. The way they were gentle with injured animals, strong when pulling a calf during a difficult birth, careful when handling the ranch accounts. She noticed other things too. The way he listened when people spoke, really listened, and the way he treated everyone from the lowest ranch hand to the banker in town with the same respect. Spring began to creep across the prairie. The ice melted from the creeks, and the first green shoots pushed through the ground. Calving season started, which meant long days and sleepless nights for everyone. Willa learned to help with the births, to recognize when a cow was in distress, to feed the orphaned calves who needed bottles. One night, she was in the barn helping with a difficult birth when Frank came to check on their progress. The calf was stuck, and the mother was exhausting herself trying to push it out. "We are going to have to pull," Frank said, rolling up his sleeves. "Willa, can you hold her head, keep her calm?" Willa knelt in the straw, stroking the cow's face, murmuring soft words while Frank worked. It took all his strength and skill, but finally the calf slid free, wet and steaming in the cold air. Frank cleared its nose and mouth, and after a heart-stopping moment, the little creature took a shuddering breath. "There you go," Frank said softly, satisfaction clear in his voice. He sat back on his heels, covered in blood and fluid, grinning. It was the first time Willa had seen him smile so freely, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "That never gets old," he said. "Every time it is a miracle." "It really is," Willa agreed, watching the mother cow begin to clean her baby. Her heart felt too large for her chest, filled with something she could not quite name. Frank looked at her, and their eyes met across the warm barn with the smell of straw and animals and new life surrounding them. The moment stretched, charged with something unspoken, until the cow shifted and broke the connection. They walked back to the house together in the pre-dawn light, not touching but close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. At the door, Frank paused. "You should know," he said quietly, "people in town have been talking about you being here." Willa's stomach dropped. Of course they had. She had been foolish to think she could outrun her past. "What are they saying? Does it matter?" Frank's jaw was set, his eyes steady on hers. "Whatever they say, it does not change anything. You are a good worker and a good person. That is all I need to know." "It matters to your reputation," Willa said. "A widow living on a single man's ranch, even with Martha here, people will make assumptions. Let them." Frank's voice was firm. "I stopped caring what people thought a long time ago. If you want to stay, the job is yours for as long as you want it." Willa felt tears burn at the back of her throat. "I want to stay. Then it is settled." But as weeks passed, Willa could not quite shake her worry. She went into town with Martha one day to buy supplies and felt the weight of disapproving stares. 2 women she did not know stopped talking abruptly when she passed. At the general store, the clerk was coldly polite, and she overheard whispered comments about her mourning period not being complete, about the impropriety of her situation. She said nothing to Frank, not wanting to burden him with her concerns, but Martha noticed. "Pay them no mind," the older woman said as they drove back to the ranch. "Small minds always find something to gossip about. They are jealous because Frank chose to help you instead of hiring one of their daughters or nieces." "But they are not wrong," Willa said quietly. "My mourning period is not complete. I should be more careful about appearances." Martha snorted. "Your mourning period for a man who left you in debt and disgrace. You do not owe Daniel Greene anything, Willa. You have mourned plenty. If you want to stop wearing black, then stop. Live your life for yourself, not for what people think is proper." Willa thought about this as spring deepened into early summer. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, painting the landscape in purples and golds and reds. She had been at the ranch for 4 months now, and it felt more like home than anywhere else she had lived. She knew the rhythm of the work, the personalities of all the animals, the way the light fell through the kitchen window in the morning, and she had come to know Frank. Not just as an employer, but as a person. She learned that he loved reading and kept a small library in his office, that he had taught himself Spanish from a book, so he could talk to some of the Mexican cattlemen who passed through, that he sent money every month to the widow of a man who had died under his command during the war. She also noticed the way he watched her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, the way his hand lingered when he passed her something, the way his voice softened when he said her name. One warm June evening after the work was done and Martha had retired to her room, Willa sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set. Frank came out and stood beside her, leaning against the railing. "Beautiful night," he said. "It is." Willa had removed her bonnet, and the evening breeze lifted her dark hair. She had finally stopped wearing full mourning, switching to gray and lavender dresses that Martha had helped her make from fabric Frank provided. "Willa," Frank said, his voice careful, "I need to ask you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it? Are you happy here? Really happy, I mean, not just making the best of things." She turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was soft, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "I am happier than I have been in years," she said honestly. "This place, the work, all of you, it has given me something I did not think I would find again. Peace." Frank's throat worked. "Good, that is good." He was quiet for a moment then. "I need you to know something. When I first saw you at the stagecoach depot, when you nearly fell and I caught your arm, I felt something. I have not felt anything like it since Emily died. I told myself it did not matter, that I was just being kind, offering you a job because you needed help. But it was not just kindness." Willa's breath caught. "Frank, let me finish, please." He turned to face her fully. "These months watching you work, seeing how you are with Ben and Martha, with the animals, how hard you try, how strong you are. Willa, I have fallen in love with you. I know it is too soon, I know you are still grieving, and I do not expect you to feel the same, but I could not keep it inside anymore. I needed you to know." The world seemed to stop. Willa stared at him, her mind racing. She had felt it too, the pull between them, had caught herself looking for him during the day, listening for his footsteps, smiling when he entered a room. But she had told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. She was damaged goods, a woman with a past, not suitable for a man like Frank. "You deserve better than me," she whispered. Frank shook his head slowly. "That is not true. Willa, I do not care what you did before you came here. I do not care what people say. I only care about who you are now, the woman I have come to know. You are kind and strong and honest. You face each day with courage even when I know you are afraid. That is the woman I love." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks. "I poured drinks in a saloon. I married a man I barely knew because I was desperate and alone. Daniel drank away every penny we had. When he died, people said I drove him to it, that I was not a good enough wife. They said I was lucky he married me at all, given what I was. Then they were fools. Frank's voice was fierce. You survived. You did what you had to do. There is no shame in that. Frank, if there was anything between us, it would only make the gossip worse. It could damage your standing in town, affect the ranch. I do not care. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cooling evening air. Willa, I have been alone for 7 years. I told myself it was better that way, safer, that I could never go through the pain of losing someone again. But you made me want to try. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to look forward to seeing them, to imagine a future with someone beside me. I am not asking you to decide anything tonight. I just needed you to know how I feel. Willa looked up at him, this good man who saw her, really saw her, without judgment or shame. And she realized with a clarity that took her breath away that she loved him too. Not because he had saved her, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who he was. Honest and kind and steady, the kind of man she had stopped believing existed. I love you too, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was impossible, but I love you, Frank. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with his hand. His palm was rough from work, warm against her skin. May I kiss you? He asked softly. Yes, she breathed. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like kissing Daniel, which had always been hurried and slightly desperate. This was slow and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Willa felt dizzy, her heart racing. I want to do this right, Frank said, resting his forehead against hers. Court you properly, give you time. I want everyone to know that I am serious about you, that this is not some passing thing. People will talk more than ever, Willa warned. Let them. He pulled back to look at her. Unless you are worried about it, I will not pressure you, Willa. We can take this as slow as you need. She thought about this, about what it would mean to be courted by Frank Ferguson in full view of Oklahoma City society. There would be whispers and judgment, but there would also be this. His hand in hers, his smile when he saw her, the possibility of a future built on something real. I am not worried, she said. Not anymore. The next Sunday, Frank drove Willa into town for church. She wore her nicest dress, lavender with lace at the collar, and he wore his good suit. They arrived early and walked into the church together, Frank's hand at the small of her back, claiming her publicly in a way that left no room for doubt about his intentions. The whispers started immediately. Heads turned, fans fluttered, eyebrows raised. But Frank kept his head high, leading Willa to a pew near the front. Martha, who had come in the wagon with them, sat on Willa's other side, her presence adding respectability. The service was torture. Willa could feel eyes boring into her back, could imagine the conversations happening in whispers. But Frank's solid presence beside her, the way he shared his hymnal with her, the gentle pressure of his hand when he helped her stand, all of it gave her courage. After the service, they stood outside in the sunshine while people filed past. Some nodded politely, some ignored them completely, but a few stopped to talk. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Crawford, shook Frank's hand and tipped his hat to Willa. Good to see you, Ferguson. Madam. The banker's wife, a formidable woman named Eleanor Hughes, stopped and looked Willa up and down. So you are the woman everyone is talking about. Willa's spine stiffened, but before she could respond, Frank said calmly, Mrs. Hughes, this is Willa Greene. Willa, Mrs. Hughes runs the church ladies' auxiliary. I've heard things about you, Mrs. Greene, Eleanor said. I am sure you have, Willa replied, keeping her voice steady. People do love to talk. Eleanor's eyes sharpened, then, surprisingly, she smiled slightly. Yes, they do. Often without knowing the full story. Frank Ferguson is one of the most respected men in this territory. If he sees fit to keep your company, then perhaps the gossips do not know everything after all. It was not quite an endorsement, but it was not condemnation either. Willa felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. Over the following weeks, Frank courted Willa with old-fashioned determination. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, took her on evening rides to show her the far corners of the ranch, sat with her on the porch after dinner to watch the stars come out. They talked about everything: his childhood in Missouri, her life in Ohio, the dreams they had each carried west, and how those dreams had changed over the years. I wanted adventure, Frank admitted one night. The farm where I grew up was so small, so confining. I thought the war would give me purpose, then afterward I thought striking out on my own would fill the emptiness. But it was not adventure I needed. It was belonging, building something that mattered. I just wanted to be safe, Willa said. After my father died, I spent 2 years terrified that I would end up with nowhere to go, no one to care if I lived or died. When Daniel proposed, I said yes, because I thought marriage meant security. I learned the hard way that marrying the wrong person is more dangerous than being alone. Frank took her hand. You are safe now. Whatever happens between us, you always have a place here. Even if you decided tomorrow that you do not want to be with me, the job is yours. That will not happen, Willa said firmly. I am not going anywhere. As summer deepened, their relationship deepened too. The ranch hands grew accustomed to seeing them together, and even the people in town began to accept their courtship. There were still whispers, still disapproving looks from some quarters, but they mattered less and less. One hot July afternoon, Frank took Willa to a bend in the river where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran cool and clear. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Martha had packed, then lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. "Marry me," Frank said suddenly. Willa turned her head to look at him. "What, marry me?" he repeated, rolling onto his side to face her. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but Willa, I am 35 years old. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are mine and I am yours. I want to build a life together, a real partnership. I want children if we are blessed with them, and a home full of laughter, and growing old together on this land we both love." Willa's heart felt like it might burst. "Frank, if it is too soon, I understand. We can wait. But I need you to know that I am serious about this, about us. I am not playing games or passing time. I want forever with you." She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The loss and shame and fear, the desperate journey to Oklahoma City, the kindness of a stranger who saw past her history to the person she really was. She thought about the months of healing, of learning to trust again, of discovering that love could be gentle and real and built on solid ground. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank's whoop of joy sent birds scattering from the trees. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly, then spun her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. They collapsed back onto the blanket, and he held her close, his heart thundering against her cheek. "We will do it right," he promised. "A proper wedding, whatever you want." "Martha will be thrilled. She has been dropping hints about this for weeks." Willa laughed. "Of course she has." They told Martha that evening. The older woman took one look at their joined hands and their glowing faces and burst into tears of happiness. "Finally," she said, hugging them both. It is about time you two figured out what everyone else already knew." "And what was that?" Frank asked, grinning. "That you are perfect for each other, you stubborn fools." Martha wiped her eyes. "Now we need to plan a wedding, and we need to do it soon before the fall work gets too busy." They decided on a date in late August, after the heat broke but before the fall cattle drive. Martha threw herself into preparations with the energy of a much younger woman, clearly delighted to have something to celebrate. She helped Willa make a wedding dress from cream-colored silk that Frank bought from a merchant in town, sewing tiny seed pearls along the neckline and cuffs. Word of the engagement spread through Oklahoma City. The reaction was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for Frank, seeing how the lonely rancher had come alive again. Others remained disapproving, certain that Willa was somehow unworthy. But Frank met all criticism with calm certainty, and his conviction began to win people over. One person who remained firmly opposed was Mrs. Dorothy Hammond, the woman from Silver Creek who had written to the hotel destroying Willa's job opportunity. She appeared at the ranch one afternoon, driving a small buggy, her face set in lines of righteous disapproval. Willa was in the garden picking vegetables when she saw the buggy approach. Her stomach dropped. She had hoped never to see anyone from Silver Creek again, but here was her past, arriving uninvited. Frank came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mrs. Hammond," he said politely but coolly. "What brings you all the way out here?" Dorothy Hammond climbed down from the buggy, her black dress severe and proper. She looked past Frank to where Willa stood frozen among the tomato plants. "Mr. Ferguson, I am here as a concerned Christian woman to warn you about the mistake you are making. That woman," she pointed at Willa with a trembling finger, "is not fit to be any decent man's wife. She worked in a saloon, serving drinks to rough men. She married poor Daniel Greene when he was drunk and trapped him into marriage. She drove him to his death with her demands and her wanton ways." The words hit like physical blows. Willa wanted to run to hide, but her feet would not move. Then Frank stepped forward, placing himself between Dorothy and Willa. "Mrs. Hammond," his voice was deadly quiet, "you will leave my property now." "But you do not understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You are a bitter, lonely woman who has nothing better to do than destroy other people's happiness. Willa told me everything about her past, about the choices she had to make to survive. There is no shame in survival, no matter what small-minded people like you choose to believe." Dorothy's face flushed. She was a saloon girl. She was a young woman alone in a hard world, doing whatever work she could find to eat and have shelter. There is no sin in that. "And as for Daniel Greene, I have made inquiries. Everyone in Silver Creek except you knows he was a drunk and a gambler long before he met Willa. If anything, she tried to save him from himself. But you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. How dare you? No, how dare you?" Frank's voice cracked like a whip. "How dare you come to my home and attack the woman I love? How dare you claim Christian charity while spreading poison and lies? You have 30 seconds to get back in that buggy and leave, or I will have you removed." Dorothy Hammond stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she gathered her skirts and climbed back into the buggy. "You will regret this," she hissed. "Both of you." "The only thing I regret is wasting time talking to you," Frank replied. "Go." The buggy rattled away, leaving dust hanging in the air. Frank turned to Willa, who had sunk to her knees among the tomato plants, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "She is gone. She cannot hurt you. You should not have done that," Willa sobbed. "She will tell everyone, make it worse. Let her. Willa, look at me." He cupped her face in his hands. "I do not care what she says or what anyone says. You are the woman I love, the woman I am going to marry. Nothing she says will change that. But your reputation, my reputation, is my own to manage. And if people judge me for marrying you, then they are not worth knowing. He kissed her forehead. We are going to build a life together, Willa. A good life, based on love and respect and partnership. That is all that matters. She clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Slowly, her tears subsided, replaced by something else. Anger. Anger at Dorothy Hammond and everyone like her who judged and condemned without knowing the full story. Anger at a world that punished women for surviving while celebrating men's sins. But beneath the anger was something stronger, determination. You are right, she said, pulling back to look at Frank. Let her say what she wants. We know the truth, and that is enough. Pride shone in Frank's eyes. That is my girl. The incident with Dorothy Hammond did spawn fresh gossip, but it also had an unexpected effect. Eleanor Hughes, the banker's wife, showed up at the ranch the next day with a delegation of women from the church auxiliary. We heard what happened, Eleanor said when Willa nervously answered the door. Dorothy Hammond has been spreading her poison all over town. We wanted you to know that not everyone believes her. Another woman, Susan Miller, stepped forward. I was widowed young too. I know what it is like to be judged, to have people assume the worst. You have done nothing wrong, Mrs. Greene. Anyone who looks at you and Frank together can see that what you have is real. Willa felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different tears. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. We would like to help with the wedding if you will let us, Eleanor said. Every bride deserves a proper celebration. And so, what Willa had imagined would be a small, quiet ceremony became something more. The church auxiliary took charge of decorating the church, organizing a reception, and spreading the word that this was a wedding worth celebrating. Not everyone approved, but enough people did that the tide of public opinion began to shift in their favor. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Willa's dress was finished, a beautiful creation that made her feel like a fairy tale princess when she tried it on. Frank ordered a new suit from the tailor in town and had the main house thoroughly cleaned and repaired, saying he wanted everything perfect for his bride. Ben, now mostly recovered from his broken leg, appointed himself in charge of making sure Frank did not get too nervous. You are like a horse before a thunderstorm, he told Frank the night before the wedding. Calm down. She loves you. She is not going to change her mind. I know, Frank said, but he paced anyway. I just want everything to be perfect for her. She deserves perfect. Nothing is perfect, Ben said sagely. But you two are good for each other, and that is better than perfect. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the August heat tempered by a gentle breeze. Willa woke in her cabin, alone for the last time. Martha came to help her dress, her gentle hands arranging the silk skirt, pinning Willa's dark hair into an elegant arrangement, fixing a small veil of delicate lace. You look beautiful, Martha said, tears in her eyes. Frank is a lucky man. I am the lucky one, Willa replied. You have all given me so much. They rode to town in the wagon, which Frank had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. The church was already filling with people when they arrived. Willa waited in a small room at the back, her heart racing with nerves and excitement. Then the music started and Martha opened the door. Ready? Willa nodded. She had no father to walk her down the aisle, but she did not need one. She had walked through fire to get here, had survived things that would have broken a weaker person. She could walk down this aisle on her own. The church doors opened, and she saw Frank standing at the front, James the foreman beside him as best man. Frank's face when he saw her made every hard moment, every tear, every lonely night worth it. He looked at her like she was the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one. like she was everything he had ever wanted and more than he dared hope for. Willa walked down the aisle with her head high, past people who whispered and people who smiled, past disapproving frowns and genuine joy, until she reached Frank's side. He took her hand, and she felt complete. The minister began the service. Willa heard the words as though from a distance, too overwhelmed by the moment to take them all in. Then it was time for vows, and Frank's voice, steady and sure, filled the church. I, Frank Ferguson, take you, Willa Greene, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, respect you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. You are my partner, my equal, my heart. I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of the gift of your love. Willa's voice shook slightly as she said her own vows. I, Willa Greene, take you, Frank Ferguson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when others saw only shame. You gave me hope when I thought it was lost forever. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you based on truth and trust and joy. You are my home, Frank, and I will cherish that for the rest of my life. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Frank kissed her as though they were the only two people in the world. The church erupted in applause, and even some of the disapproving faces softened into reluctant smiles. They walked back down the aisle together, Frank's arm around Willa's waist, both of them grinning like fools. Outside, people threw rice and flower petals, and the celebration began in earnest. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food that the auxiliary women had prepared. There was music and dancing, and Frank swept Willa into a waltz while their neighbors clapped and cheered. It was not fancy by city standards, but it was full of genuine warmth, and Willa felt surrounded by love in a way she had never experienced before. As the sun began to set, Frank and Willa slipped away from the celebration, climbing into the decorated wagon for the ride back to the ranch. Their friends and neighbors waved them off, calling out good wishes and blessings. The ride home was quiet, both of them tired but happy. Frank held the reins with one hand, his other arm around Willa, pulling her close against his side. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the familiar landscape pass by, now transformed by the golden light of evening. When they reached the ranch, Frank lifted Willa down from the wagon, then, to her surprise, swept her up in his arms and carried her toward the main house. Frank. She laughed. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her inside, kicking the door closed behind them. The house was quiet, Martha having agreed to stay in town overnight to give them privacy. Frank set Willa down gently in the sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth despite the warm evening. They stood facing each other, suddenly shy. This was a threshold in more ways than one, a crossing into something new and unknown. Willa reached up and unpinned her veil, setting it carefully aside. Frank removed his jacket and tie, then took her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. The kiss led to others, and eventually they made their way upstairs to the bedroom Frank had prepared for them. He was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Their joining was both passionate and tender, a physical expression of the love that had been building between them for months. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Willa's head on Frank's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Frank, when I got off that stagecoach in January, I was so afraid. I thought my life was over, that I would never have anything good again. But you changed everything." "We changed everything," he corrected. You could have given up, could have let the world beat you down, but you fought. You chose to keep going, to try again. That is one of the things I love most about you, your courage." They talked into the night, making plans for their future. Frank wanted to expand the ranch, buy more land, maybe build a new barn. Willa wanted to plant a bigger garden, maybe try her hand at raising chickens and selling eggs in town. They talked about children, both hoping for a family but agreeing that whatever happened, they had each other, and that was enough. The seasons turned. Fall brought the cattle drive, and Willa surprised Frank by riding along, proving herself capable in the saddle and unafraid of the hard work. Winter came, and they weathered it together, cozy in the house while snow piled up outside. Spring returned, and with it, news that made Willa's heart race. She was pregnant. Frank's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around, then immediately became worried that he had hurt her or the baby. Willa laughed at his concern, assuring him she was not made of glass. Martha fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate enough, rested enough, did not work too hard. Ben carved a beautiful cradle from oak wood, and the ranch hands took turns bringing little gifts. A soft blanket, a tiny pair of leather booties, a rattle made from dried beans in a sealed gourd. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for the first few months, and the Oklahoma heat in late summer made her uncomfortable and swollen. But Frank was beside her through it all, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her aching feet, reading to her when she could not sleep. In late October, as the first frost touched the prairie, Willa's labor began. Martha and the doctor from town were both there, along with Eleanor Hughes, who had become a good friend over the past year. Frank paced outside the bedroom for hours, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards until finally the thin wail of a baby cut through the evening air. The doctor opened the door, grinning. "You have a son, Frank, a healthy boy with a good, strong set of lungs." Frank rushed inside to find Willa propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling bundle. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Frank, meet your son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny face with wonder. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at them with unfocused eyes, one small fist waving in the air. "He is perfect," Frank whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Frank said, "William, after your father. William Frank Ferguson." Willa nodded, smiling through her tears. "William, yes, that is perfect." The baby changed everything and nothing. The work of the ranch continued, but now there was a cradle in the kitchen where William slept while Willa cooked, and Frank's office echoed with baby sounds during the evenings. They took turns walking the floor when William was fussy, marveling at his every milestone. His first smile, the day he rolled over, the first time he laughed. The people of Oklahoma City, even those who had once disapproved of Willa, could not resist a baby. Women brought gifts and advice, and Willa found herself part of a community of mothers, welcomed into a circle she had never expected to join. It turned out that a baby was the great equalizer, bridging social divides and softening hearts. William was 6 months old when Willa realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with joy but also slight panic. 2 babies under 2 years old would be a challenge, but they had faced challenges before and emerged stronger. The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Willa's body knew what to do, and she was not as frightened. In the summer of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, delicate creature with Frank's green eyes and Willa's dark hair. They named her Grace Eleanor Ferguson, Grace for the gift she represented, Alina after the friend who had stood by them. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered under Frank's capable management. They bought adjacent land when it became available, expanding their holdings. Ben eventually retired but stayed on the property in a small cabin Frank built for him, still offering advice and wisdom. Tommy grew into a capable ranch hand, eventually becoming foreman when James decided to start his own place. Martha lived to see William start school and Grace take her first steps. She passed peacefully in her sleep one winter night, and they buried her on a hill overlooking the prairie she had loved. At the funeral, Willa wept not just for the loss but in gratitude for the woman who had welcomed her, taught her, and loved her like a daughter. The children grew and more followed. Another son, Daniel, named in forgiveness and letting go of the past, born in 1883. Then twin girls, Sarah and Emma, in 1885, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischievous ways. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely now rang with laughter and shouts and the organized chaos of a large family. Willa threw herself into being a mother with the same determination she brought to everything. She read to her children every night, taught them letters and numbers, made sure they understood the value of hard work and kindness. Frank was equally devoted, somehow finding time between ranch work to play with the children, teach the boys to ride, and let the girls help him with the horses. On their 10th anniversary, Frank took Willa back to the bend in the river where he had proposed. The children were with Ben for the afternoon, and they had a few precious hours alone. They spread a blanket under the cottonwood trees, older now but still standing strong. 10 years, Frank said, pulling Willa into his arms. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like forever in the best way. I know what you mean, Willa replied, settling against his chest. Frank, do you ever regret it, taking a chance on a stranger with a complicated past? Never. His voice was firm. Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa. You and our children, this life we have built together. It is more than I ever dreamed of having. Even when the twins got into the flour and covered the kitchen in white dust, Frank laughed. Even then. Well, maybe not in that exact moment, but generally speaking, yes. Willa turned to look up at him. I never thought I would be this happy. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so lost, so broken. You saw something in me I could not see in myself. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. No, Frank said, kissing her forehead. You were always that person, I just recognized it. You saved yourself, Willa. I just got lucky enough to be there to support you. They made love there by the river, slow and unhurried, celebrating a decade of partnership and love. The sun was beginning to set when they finally packed up to head home, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. At the ranch, chaos greeted them. Ben stood on the porch, looking slightly harried, while all 5 children ran circles around the yard. William, now 9, was trying to organize a game that his younger siblings were ignoring in favor of chasing chickens. How do you do this every day? Ben asked, only half joking. Practice, Willa said, laughing. Lots and lots of practice. The years continued to unfold. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Grace was her father's shadow, following him around the ranch and learning everything about cattle and ranching. Daniel was the peacemaker, always smoothing over conflicts between his siblings. The twins were forces of nature, impossible to predict or fully contain. When William was 12, Frank began teaching him the business side of ranching, knowing that one day the boy might want to take over. But he was careful never to pressure, always emphasizing that his children should follow their own paths. Grace, it turned out, had a real talent for training horses, and Frank encouraged her, building her a separate corral where she could work with young horses, teaching them to accept saddle and rider. Willa became involved in the community in ways she never expected. She joined the church auxiliary that had once seemed so intimidating, eventually becoming its president. She started a lending library in town, pooling books from various households so everyone could have access. She organized fundraisers for families in need and became known as someone who could be counted on when trouble struck. Dorothy Hammond made one more appearance in their lives, arriving in Oklahoma City for the funeral of a relative when William was 13. She was older, grayer, but still carrying the same bitter disapproval. She tried to corner Willa after church one Sunday, but Willa simply looked at her with pity and said, "I forgive you, Dorothy. I hope someday you find peace." The look of shock on Dorothy's face was almost comical. She had come armed for battle and found only compassion. It took the wind from her sails completely, and she left town shortly after without causing any further trouble. As the children grew older, the question of their futures became more pressing. William announced at 16 that he wanted to go to college, to study agriculture and modern ranching techniques. Frank, who had never had such opportunities himself, was immensely proud and immediately began investigating schools. Grace wanted to stay on the ranch, to breed and train horses professionally. The twins, still young but already showing distinct personalities, seemed headed in completely different directions. Sarah loved cooking and wanted to open a restaurant someday, while Emma was fascinated by medicine and talked about becoming a doctor. Daniel, the quiet middle child, surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a teacher. "There are so many kids out here who do not have access to good schools," he explained. "I want to change that." Frank and Willa supported all their children's dreams, even as they wondered how the ranch would continue if none of them wanted to take it over. But Grace settled that question when she was 18, sitting her parents down for a serious conversation. "I know William is the oldest," she said, "and traditionally the ranch would go to him. But I love this place more than anything. I want to run it someday to keep it going, maybe expand into horse breeding alongside the cattle. Would you consider that? A woman running the Ferguson ranch?" Frank looked at Willa and they both smiled. "Grace," he said, "your mother helped build this ranch as much as I did. If you want to run it, if you have the passion and dedication, then it is yours. Gender has nothing to do with it." Grace threw her arms around them both, tears of joy streaming down her face. The years moved faster as they aged. William went off to college in Texas, studying hard and writing home every week. Grace worked alongside Frank, learning every aspect of the business. Daniel got his teaching certificate and opened a small school on the edge of their property, teaching children from all the surrounding ranches. The twins followed their passions, Sarah apprenticing with a chef in Oklahoma City, Emma convincing a doctor to take her on as a student despite significant resistance to the idea of a female physician. Willa and Frank watched their children grow and flourish with pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing. They were in their 50s now, gray threading through their hair, faces lined by sun and work and laughter. But they were still strong, still partners in every sense, still deeply in love. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was 1899, the end of one century and the beginning of another, and Willa could not help but think about how far they had all come. William brought home his new wife, a smart young woman named Catherine who was studying to be a lawyer. Grace was courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a good man who respected her ambitions. Daniel's school had 20 students now, and he was talking about building a larger facility. The twins, at 14, were still a handful but showed promise of becoming remarkable women. As the sun set on the celebration, Willa stood on the porch of the main house watching her family. Frank came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful," Willa said simply, "for all of this. For you, for the life we built together. That cold January day when I arrived in Oklahoma City, I could never have imagined this. A family, a home, respect, love. It seemed impossible." "You made it possible," Frank said. "Your strength, your courage, your refusal to let the world define you. I am so proud of you, Willa. So grateful that you took a chance on a lonely rancher who saw something special in you." She turned in his arms to face him. "We took a chance on each other. That is what made it work." They kissed, not caring that their children could see that they were supposed to be too old for such displays. After 20 years, their love had only deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the first flush of passion. More years passed. William took a position at an agricultural college, teaching and researching new methods. Grace married her rancher, and they merged the two properties, creating one of the largest and most successful operations in the Oklahoma Territory. When Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, Grace was invited to the celebration in recognition of her contributions to the territory's agricultural success. Daniel's school continued to grow, eventually becoming the foundation for the public school system in their county. Sarah opened her restaurant in Oklahoma City, earning fame for her innovative takes on traditional cooking. Emma finally became a doctor after years of fighting prejudice and opened a practice specifically serving women and children, particularly those in rural areas who had limited access to medical care. Frank and Willa gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, though they remained actively involved. They took pleasure in their grandchildren, a growing brood of energetic youngsters who filled the house with noise and joy. Willa taught them to bake, to garden, to read. Frank taught them to ride, to respect the land, to work hard. On a crisp fall day in 1910, Frank and Willa celebrated their 31st anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. They were in their 70s now, slowed by age but still vital, still engaged with life. Over roast chicken and apple pie, they reminisced about their years together. "You remember the first time you saw me?" Willa asked. "At the stagecoach depot, of course. You nearly fell on the ice and I caught your arm. You looked so lost and so determined at the same time. I knew right then that you were someone special, even though I told myself I was just being helpful." Frank smiled. "I was lying to myself even then. And do you remember proposing by the river? Every detail." "I had been rehearsing what to say for weeks, but when the moment came, I just blurted it out. I was terrified you would say no." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Instead, you said yes and made me the happiest man alive. We have been so lucky, Frank. Not everyone gets this. A love that lasts, that grows stronger over time." Willa's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment grateful for what we built together." "We will have years yet," Frank assured her. "I plan to be ornery and stubborn and stick around until I am 90 at least," Willa laughed. "That sounds like you." They did have years, as it turned out. They watched Oklahoma grow from territory to state, saw the first automobiles appear on the dusty roads, lived through the changes that marked the turn of the century. Their children thrived, their grandchildren grew, and eventually, great-grandchildren arrived, adding another generation to the Ferguson legacy. Frank passed first, in his sleep at the age of 82, lying beside Willa in the bed they had shared for decades. She woke to find him still and peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the gratitude. They had been given more years together than most people ever dreamed of, and not one of them had been wasted. At the funeral, all their children and grandchildren gathered. Grace spoke about her father's integrity and vision. William talked about his encouragement to pursue education. Daniel described his kindness to everyone regardless of station. The twins, now middle-aged women themselves, shared funny stories that made everyone laugh through their tears. Willa was quiet during the service, holding herself together through sheer force of will. But afterward, when everyone had returned to the ranch house, Grace found her in the barn, standing in the doorway of a stall, tears finally flowing freely. "Mama," Grace said softly, putting an arm around her mother's shoulders. "This is where he proposed," Willa said, her voice shaking. "Right here in this barn after we helped with a difficult birth. He looked at me across the straw and said he wanted forever with me. And we got it, Grace." "We actually got it." "You did," Grace agreed. "You gave all of us an example of what love should be. You showed us that the past does not define us, that we can overcome anything with courage and support. That is Daddy's legacy and yours too." Willa lived another 5 years, staying active and involved in her children's lives until the end. She continued to write in the journal she had kept since her wedding day, recording family stories and wisdom for future generations. She made sure each grandchild and great-grandchild received a letter from her, explaining their family history and encouraging them to live with courage and compassion. When her time came, she was ready. She died peacefully, surrounded by family at the age of 84. Her last words were about Frank, about seeing him again soon. The family buried her beside him on the hill overlooking the prairie, where the wind could always reach them, and the sky stretched endless and free. At the wake, the house overflowed with people. Not just family, but friends and neighbors, people whose lives Frank and Willa had touched over the decades. Stories were shared, tears shed, laughter exchanged. Eleanor Hughes, now ancient herself, stood and raised a glass. "To Frank and Willa Ferguson," she said, her voice wavering but strong, "who taught us all that love sees beyond shame, beyond judgment, beyond the surface. They built something remarkable here, not just a ranch but a legacy of compassion and courage. May we all be so fortunate in our loves and our lives." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed, "To Frank and Willa." Grace took over the ranch completely after her mother's death, running it with the same combination of hard work and innovation that her father had used. She kept the main house exactly as her parents had left it, turning it into a living museum of sorts, where grandchildren could still feel the presence of their grandparents in every room. The small cabin where Willa had lived when she first arrived at the ranch was preserved too, maintained as a reminder of humble beginnings and the power of second chances. Grace would take her own grandchildren there, telling them the story of how their great-grandmother arrived in Oklahoma City with nothing but a carpet bag and a broken heart, and how their great-grandfather saw past her shame to the strength and beauty within. The story became part of the family mythology, passed down through generations. The tale of Frank and Willa, the cowboy and the widow who found each other in the frozen valley of January 1878 and built a love that lasted beyond death, that created a legacy of courage and compassion that shaped not just their family but their entire community. Years later, when Grace was old herself, she would sit on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the prairie her parents had loved. She would think about that first day her mother arrived, scared and alone, and how her father had seen what others missed. She would remember their love, the way they looked at each other even after decades together, the partnership they modeled, the family they created. And she would smile, knowing that the greatest gift her parents had given her was not the ranch or the land or the material success. It was the example of what love could be when given freely, without judgment, built on a foundation of respect and trust. That was the true legacy of Frank and Willa Ferguson, and it would endure as long as the prairie wind blew and the Oklahoma sky stretched wide and blue above the land they had tamed together. The ranch continued to prosper under Grace's management, and later under her son's leadership. The school Daniel founded grew into a full educational complex serving hundreds of children. Sarah's restaurant became a landmark. Emma's medical practice evolved into a women's health clinic that still serves the community. William's research contributed to agricultural advances that helped farmers throughout the region. But perhaps the most important legacy was the simple truth that Frank and Willa had proven: that every person deserves a second chance, that love can bloom in the harshest conditions, and that the courage to be kind, to see past judgment and shame to the human being beneath, can change not just individual lives but entire communities. Their grave on the hill became a place of pilgrimage for family members, who would bring their troubles and joys to share with the ancestors who started it all. Fresh flowers always graced the plot, and their headstone bore a simple inscription chosen by their children. They saw beauty in each other when the world saw only shame. From that vision, a legacy of love was born. And so the story of the widow and the cowboy lived on, a testament to the transforming power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of true love. In a hard land during a hard time, they had created something soft and sustainable, something that nurtured not just themselves but generations to come. It was more than a love story. It was proof that grace and goodness could flourish anywhere, if only someone had the courage to plant the seeds and the dedication to help them grow.